Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. This is a special edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John DeLynn, and I'm here with two very special guests today, Brooke and John Mclays. Welcome, Brooke and John. Thanks for coming.
It's good to be here.
Just to let the audience know a little bit about why this is a special interview and why it's interesting. I guess I'll just say it. John Mclays was a CES employee, an LDS church education system employee for 14 years. He taught, definitely taught institute, seminary, was an institute director, and as we'll learn, that's not just sort of an individual job and calling and responsibility, but it's also very much something that the couple sort of interviews for and obtains and executes on together. So John and Brooke worked, with CES or for CES for 14 years. And a few months ago, because of crisis of faith and other issues that we'll get into, resigned their membership from the church. And so this is going to be a Mormon Stories podcast, but we're also developing kind of a separate podcast focusing specifically on why people leave the LDS church. The website may be whyLDSleave.com or whymormonsleave.com. We're working out the final details, but this is going to be a Mormon Stories podcast, and it's going to be part of that series on why people leave. The purpose of this interview is to understand the story of Brooke and John, to get a better understanding for why someone would leave the church, especially at the level that they were at within the church. And we want to do that for a couple reasons. It's actually not to be controversial. It's actually not to try and be scandalous or to cause problems. We want to do two things. Maybe a few things. We want to build awareness of why people would leave. If there are issues that are causing people to leave, we want those issues to be well known, so that everyone who's either a member or a prospective member can understand what the church is about, the history, the culture, the doctrine. Let's get all that out on the table so that everyone has a full awareness of what the experience is, so that they can choose it with a full knowledge and with a full conscience. And then most importantly, we as an organization with the Open Stories Foundation, with Mormon Stories, have our hearts and our souls with special empathy for those who suffer as a result of making decisions that fall outside the mainstream of Mormonism. We don't believe that there should be such a high social, spiritual, familial, organizational cost to unorthodoxy or to even disbelief. We see marriages dissolving, we see people being driven to depression and anxiety and even suicide over issues that we're going to be talking about today. And for us, the level of pain is unacceptable. And so if we can create not only a general sense of awareness about these issues, but if we can also create a space culturally for people who fall outside the norm, who fall outside the mainstream, who aren't able to believe everything, or who want to know the full history or doctrine or whatever, and make decisions that are different. We want them to be able to do that at a much lower emotional and social cost. Not in any way with the desire to harm any faith that's already out there. We're in full support of believers and of belief, and of traditional institutional participation. But we just want to allow for that and for there to be more space and support and less pain and punishment for people who aren't able to follow orthodoxy or mainstream LDS practices. So that's a really long setup,
it's good.
But I just want to make sure that people understand where we're coming from. Do you guys buy into everything I said?
Love it.
Yes.
Yeah?
Sounds
Amen.
great.
We can be done.
All right, let's go. Okay. So let's dive in. Sorry for that long disclaimer. But let's start by just briefly covering, do the check boxes of your early church years in terms of the rites of passage or the things that you accomplished that kind of led you to the point where you started considering seminary. But let's stop before then so that we can sort of really delve into that portion. But
Sure.
I guess, Brooke, let's start with you just to break the norm a little bit.
Okay, so let's see. My early Mormon story is, let's see, I was born in Northern California. My dad and mom were young law students up in Southern California, or in Northern California. And then we moved back to Hooper, Utah, actually, and lived. My grandma has a farm out there. And so my dad has always kind of been a country boy, and my mom a little bit of a city girl. And I think that my mom felt keenly desirous to get out of the kind of the country life. And so we moved to Farmington, Utah. And I always remember singing the song, I See My Mother Kneeling, and believing that that was our family. Like, I really believed that we had that ideal, incredible Mormon family.
That's Love Is Spoken Here, right?
Yes, Love Is Spoken Here.
Okay.
And
She's
so,
lost the spirit, you can tell.
so when when we were living in our home in Farmington, a series of events caused my dad to lose his bar in Utah, and so we moved to Southern California. And then my mom had an affair and just completely left the church. And along with that choice, also left our family.
What year was this for you?
I was 16 when that happened.
Oh, wow.
And I was the oldest of 6 girls. And so, you can imagine in that situation, the only stability that I had was the church. And so I had great friends. I completely believed in all of the truth claims. And I feel like at that point in my life, I kind of started to switch from just wanting to be a really good Mormon, and now I was going to be a good Mormon that proved to my mom that she was a bad person. And so as I kind of look back, especially this year, as a lot of things have kind of become retrospective, I realized that behind so many of the choices I made was always this proving to my mom. I went to BYU and I wanted to prove to my mom that I could be more healthy and better than she could ever believe. And I remember on the day of our wedding, my mom had flown in from Southern California and wore a mini skirt to the temple. Shame. And I just was so, rather than putting my arms around her and understanding what it was like for her to have her daughter get married, I just left her outside the temple and didn't even think twice about it. And I did think twice about it. What I thought was, look, now she will see that she has brought this on herself. Shame. I mean, it really, to me, is terrible to review that stage in my life.
But what was the stuff? Talk about how the church, what it meant to you.
Oh my gosh.
And what type of Mormon were you in terms of your behavior and your beliefs?
You know what?
During that time.
Well, yeah. I mean, except for always trying to prove everything to my mom and everybody in my family who wasn't in the line, I do feel like the church gave me so many incredibly good habits and strong connections with family and friends and things.
So was prayer important to you?
Absolutely. Oh, I did the prayer and I did the whole package because I really believed in it. Morning scripture study, morning seminary, prayer in the morning, prayer at every meal, prayer at night. I really, and I think that there were a lot of things that I did not do because I knew what I should be doing. And so, when friends would be getting together, I would think, but it would be better for me to stay home and pray. Or, maybe my sisters would be going and doing something, and I would think, but it would be better for me to, kind of, consecrate my time to this thing. And so, I was very actively and incredibly involved, and especially at a time when I didn't really have parental support. The church was a gift because I was in leadership positions with arranging girls' camp and in leadership positions with my ward. And when I started dating, it was very much a part of who I was. And, you know, if you were going to accept me as a girlfriend, then you needed to accept that I was completely committed to this cause. And so...
did you have any spiritual experiences that are really profound for you that you look back and say, these were some
just like completely... You know, I think that I had a lot. I remember especially going through the angst with my parents' divorce, which was just terrifically difficult at the age that I was. And then to have not just divorce, but to have it be kind of a terrible divorce where it wasn't, the children were not part of the equation of how can we make this a healthy transition. And so I remember multiple times, like I remember one day I decided that I was going to go find my own sacred grove. And so I walked around our neighborhood and finally found, you know, in the middle of Orange County, California, you can't find a lot of sacred groves, but up on the top hill I found this little patch of kind of forest land. I climbed under these tiny trees and just wept and prayed to Heavenly Father to give me peace. I said I wasn't going to cry.
Crying's okay.
I should have gone the Kleenex box.
I was a step ahead. Your husband took care of it.
I was a step ahead.
And I remember every time I prayed for peace or prayed for an answer to prayers, I really believed I got it. And I still do. I still very much feel that.
So what did you feel when you prayed?
Just an overwhelming sensation like, you know what, it's all going to be okay. I'm here for you. And so I felt like, you know, in this time where I thought maybe I don't know how to go forward, I always felt like, yeah, I could go forward because I knew that God would take all of it and make it work. And so, and I still very much feel that. I feel like I need to make that clear that intervention in my life has not left in any way. But I think that all of the times that I thought God was telling me that church was true, maybe he was just trying to tell me he loved me, you know, but I was so conditioned to believe that every answer to prayer equals the church is true.
That's how you processed it.
And so
you were a firm literal believer in the church.
Oh, very much so, yeah. In fact, right after we got married, I remember having about a month where I just wept almost every day. Like I really had to struggle through this concept of polygamy because I knew that would be part of the, you know, our future relationship. And so that was a hard month because here we're newlyweds and he's mine and I love him so much. And then so yes, I very much, you know, and I kind of feel like I have a penchant for doctrine. Like I can remember, because it's so important to me, I could remember teachings and lines and quotes from prophets. And so all of those things were very carefully built into my understanding of my faith and what that made me and who that was. And I definitely have always felt like I have something special that I need to bring to other people. Yeah.
And so because you were raised in a Mormon framework, I'm going to ask you what some would say was a very sexist question, but what type of man did you want to marry?
Oh, well, without question, I wanted to marry. That's actually a question that I've asked myself a lot lately is, if I was the person that I was, would I have married who John was at the time? Because and I'm not saying that in an unkind way, but because there is some level of change that starts to happen when you start to take a good look at what you really believe. And I wanted someone righteous. And I remember when I first met John, we got along really well, and he was a really good kisser. And so that was really nice. But above all, there was a sense of his stalwartness that I really was attracted to, and I knew that he would never lead me astray. And I
was working at the MTC.
Yeah. He was working at the MTC, and so I could tell.
That makes me more righteous.
Yeah, and I have to say that at the same time, underlying all of this is also a family that's not active, and so I kind of felt myself a pretty tolerable, you know, like as much as I bought into the whole framework, I felt like it was the best thing for me and that everybody else had to go on a path, but ultimately they'd end up in the church. And so, it's not like I was out looking for Moroni, but I wanted somebody who was safe, who wasn't too much of a skeptic or a big question thinker, because I really felt like that was not safe, and I wanted to stay in the boundaries of safety. And so to have someone who worked at the MTC and wanted to be CES, that was a perfectly safe decision. And he was a good kisser.
All right, John. Well, Brooke, thank you for that. John, let's just do a really quick,
Okay.
and you don't have to talk about your reflections now back then in terms of how you're processing now what you experienced then. Let's just talk about
Okay.
what are the main bullet points, rite of passages of your early church experience that led up to your
All right.
your marriage.
Well, I was born in Las Vegas, and I mentioned that we only lived there a few years, but my dad was already teaching early morning seminary. And so we moved to Provo, and then we were in the Provo-Springville area for most of my youth. But I think an important part of my story is that my father is CES, because he was working for the IRS in Las Vegas, and he felt driven and felt compelled to come back to BYU, where he went through the pre-service program that existed. This would have been in the early to mid-'70s, and he was hired to teach seminary full-time. So I grew up in the church. My father is a convert. My mom is, her family has been in the church much longer, even some pioneer stock on my mom's side. And I was very devout. It sounds boastful to say that, but the church was very important to me, and I wasn't a perfect person, and never have been, and I'm still not. But I did feel a tremendous, I felt a lot of guilt growing up. But I think that as I've discussed even more openly over the last few months, especially with people who have made similar choices as us to leave the church, but even some within the church, I've realized I was really disciplined as a young person. Now, did I make some mistakes and commit some sins? I did. And I would immediately go to my bishop, even if it was over the tiniest thing. In retrospect, I think some of those things were tiny, and maybe some of them weren't. But if I remember the first time I kissed a girl, for example, I was in 9th grade, and she was a good kisser too, but not as good as you. And I went home that night. First of all, I was ecstatic because it was awesome. It was really, really neat. And by the time I had been picked up from the house that we were at, by the time I got home, I felt such tremendous guilt. It was almost unbearable. And that's where my father shines, and maybe is not typical true believing Mormon, because he has, I think part of this is his background, but I'm sharing this to illustrate. I mean, I was weeping because I had kissed a girl, and I felt very, very guilty, like I had done something inappropriate. And my dad was great in saying, "Son, come on, let's put this in perspective." And I remember sitting on the porch and him putting his arm around me, but I didn't grow up wanting to be a seminary teacher. I grew up appreciating it, being reminded very often about how many blessings we got because my father was in the Lord's work. I remember at times in my life wondering why all the products were made by the same company in our cupboards, because they all said Deseret on them. And then as I grew older, I realized what that meant as far as getting some assistance from the church. And so very integrated with and a literal believer of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And before my mission, I went to Utah State University, and I was going to study psychology.
Go Aggies! Woohoo!
I am a true Aggie, and so speaking of kissing, anyway, I was very interested in psychology, and I had law and medicine on my mind as well. In fact, I just had a story pop into my mind since you've asked me about the church, and it has to do with Utah State. I went to a youth conference, and I must have been 15 years old, and it was at Utah State. And it was during the testimony meeting, and I remember sitting there after the leader had said, "We'll now turn the time over to you," this room full of teenagers in an auditorium. I don't think it was the Taggart Center. I can't remember which building we were in, and I remember my heart pounding, and I think a lot of Mormons and post-Mormons and people can relate to this feeling of feeling like that's the Spirit saying to me, it's time to bear your testimony, but then been feeling conflicted about embarrassment and what if it doesn't come out right. But I was the first person to stand up that day, and I used, in my teaching, I often use humor, or I try to break the ice, and I said something that the crowd kind of responded to, and then I shared my testimony the best I could. But I remember the way the adults and youth reacted to that had a profound impact on me. And the feelings I was left with were, one, I'm good at this. But people respond well to the things that I said. And the very act of standing and professing my beliefs caused me to feel good about these things that I believe in and about the way people responded. But then I went on my mission to the Portugal, Lisbon North mission, had a wonderful 2 years, 1992 to 1994. I had great companions and great experiences and served in amazing areas and had all kinds of spiritual experiences. And it was kind of on my mission where I had that thought, I can do this. Like, I really love testifying of Joseph Smith. I feel so good, and I seem to have an impact on other people. I remember teaching this man who was Yugoslavian. I was on the island of Madeira, and so it was in English, which, even though my Portuguese was really solid, I think it was pretty good at that point in my mission, it was nice to teach in English. I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. And after telling about the first vision, and we were talking about prayer and the importance of asking God to know if these things are true, I made just an impassioned plea for him to do that and shared my testimony. And he just looked me dead in the eye and said, what are you going to do when you're no longer called elder? And I said, I was taken aback. I thought, what does that have to do with my testimony? And I said, well, I've thought about medical school and maybe psychology. And he looked me right in the eyes and he said, you should be an attorney. And I said, really? And he said, because you're very convincing. And I thought, oh, well, I'll take that as a compliment. But of course, what did I say? That's the Spirit, that's not me. And especially as a CES employee, we are taught to any goodness that, and this is how I felt, these are all my opinions and I own them, but I have to give that credit back to God. And if I'm successful in sharing a message, it's not my message, it's not my skill, and God gave me this, and it's the Spirit anyway. But this Yugoslavian, his take on it was, I'm looking at you thinking you're very good at what you do, you're very convincing. And he didn't, to my recollection, join the church, but he was a very nice guy.
Will you do me a favor? Will you bear your testimony as if you were still that believer? Testimony as you would have borne it, not to mock, to let us know what type of Mormon you were.
Yeah.
What type of conviction you had.
It's hard for me because I was very authentic. It's important for me, for my family and my friends and anybody who cares to know that I was never faking it. I resigned so I wouldn't have to say things that I didn't believe. And because that's something that it's important to me, honesty and integrity. And we were talking about this on the way up, and maybe as opposed to trying to, and there is a part of me that says to some people this is sacred. In other words, when somebody bears their conviction from the pulpit and they're speaking of Jesus Christ and of the Book of Mormon and Thomas S. Monson, that's very special. And as you said in the introduction, we have no desire to be mean-spirited or to take away from what anybody believes. And so I would not want to come across as being mocking in any way, shape, or form. But on the drive up here, we talked about some of the phrases, and one that I would like to use, and I meant this, was I would say that I know that Joseph Smith saw what he said he saw and did what he said he did. That was often a part of my testimony. I would bear testimony that the atonement was real and that I didn't understand it, but that I fully believed and felt the benefits of it in my life. I would have started with something anecdotal about my life. My children, I would have, because to me the gospel was, I tried to live it. And so even in sharing a testimony, I wanted to, it's hard, but I think you want people to like your testimony. You want people, especially as a CES guy, I had people that revered me, and maybe that's too strong of a word. People are going to laugh when they hear that, but they really looked up to me. And And so I might have started with a little story and said this happened the other day, and then I would have said, very similar to what Brooke said, the words I know would have been used a lot. I know. And I would have borne testimony that I know that Thomas S. Monson is a prophet of God, that he speaks for God. And
you start there before God? Would you go God, Jesus, Joseph Smith, Thomas S. Monson?
I honestly didn't have a pattern.
Okay.
It would be different each time, and maybe I just wanted to stand up and bear testimony of prayer or of family. But I will say this, and I think a lot of the listeners will, and podcast listeners will appreciate and understand this. It was a very correlated testimony. The things that I bore testimony of were the things that we've been taught to focus on as members of the church. And I would often interlace scriptures, and if bearing a testimony of a prophet, I might say that I know that Thomas S. Monson speaks for the Lord, because whether by the voice of my own voice or by the voice of my servants, it is the same. And because I was very familiar with the scriptures.
What would you have said about God?
I would have said that I know he lives. I would have said, I know he lives. I know that he loves me. I know that Jesus Christ is his only begotten Son. I would have borne testimony of the atonement. In fact, to me, I tried in every prayer that I offered and every testimony that I bore to mention the atonement. And I felt, and part of that was being taught that it is the core doctrine of our beliefs, of LDS beliefs. And also, I think, a deep down need to feel that for myself, to a recognition that I needed such a thing, that I really firmly believed in what I thought Jesus Christ had done for me.
What about Joseph? What would you say about Joseph?
That I defended Joseph in every way, shape, or form. I never allowed, in my mind and in my heart, and this could be to my own error, people could say you could have studied, you could have known, you didn't have to do this, but I defended him to the utmost. That when I defended his honor and his integrity, and to be told, as I often was, that I was a defender of the faith was a high compliment to me.
So what would you say about Joseph?
That I know that he was a prophet of God, that he was a good man, that he saw what he said he saw in the grove, and that the first vision really happened. I might even have said, although I tried not to talk about negative things, in other words, I tried to keep it on the positive upswing, because I like conversations like that better. But I might talk about what naysayers, and Gordon B. Hinckley used the word critics a lot, and I might mention what critics have to say about them, but I would bear my testimony of what I knew to be true.
What about the church? What would you say about the church?
That it is the only true and living church.
Would you say
earth.
that?
I would. Yeah, it's Doctrine and Covenants, Section 1. I mean, I firmly believe that. But I would, again, in the nicest way possible. And we'll talk about this when we get into CES, because there's a lot going on there with that one true church doctrine, but that I believe that the church was the way to contain all of the authority that's needed for us to return to the presence of Heavenly Father. So it was the core things, the temple, the prophet, the priesthood authority, Joseph Smith and the first vision. Those were the things that I focused on.
What would you say about the Book of Mormon?
That I knew it to be true, that I knew it to be the Word of God, and I would, that a man will draw nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book, that it was the most correct book of any on earth. Superlative phrases ad nauseum. That was my teaching as well.
But you believed it?
I did. I did.
And did you have spiritual experiences growing up that you based all this on?
Sure. One comes to mind before my mission. I was living with my aunt and uncle in Tucson, Arizona, working and saving money for my mission. And they are very generous and good people. And they let me stay there with my cousin, who I love. And I was reading in the book of Mosiah in chapter 17, and I think the specific verses were 9 and 10, sitting on the bunk there. And I just had an incredible feeling of admiration for Abinadi, of appreciation for his courage to do what he did in the face of adversity, and just a feeling that there's something to this book. So I got off the bed and I went literally into the closet and cleared a space there. It was a little messy, and and I said a prayer. I didn't have, during that prayer, tremendous feelings. I didn't even feel what I would have called the Spirit as strong as I did sitting on the bed reading the Book of Mormon. But in my mind, what the thought that came to me that I grabbed a hold of was, you already know that it's true. And so I kind of rode that right into the mission. And I didn't start having serious, the first time I remember having serious doubts about the Joseph Smith story and the Book of Mormon was as a missionary in my first area, in the first month of my mission. Before that, it was, if there was an issue, it was me. If there was a concern, it was me. If there was fallibility or error, it was me. I put it all on me. Never would I have ever even considered the possibility that the church was not what it purported to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump to the process of becoming a CES employee.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You want me to just dive in?
Yeah, and incorporate Brooke as she's part of the process.
Okay, absolutely. Junior year at Brigham Young University, I transferred after my mission. I didn't share this, but it was my mission that I think I mentioned made me start to feel like maybe I could do this for a living. So I thought, what's the next best thing? Teaching at the MTC. So I had a scholarship at Utah State that I elected to not seek to try to renew, but I wanted to be close to my family. I wanted to save a little bit of money. I could live with my family, but I really wanted to teach at the MTC. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. I consider that a blessing. So in January of 1995, I started teaching at the MTC. By my junior year, which would have been 96, is when you enter into the pre-service program. Now, for those who may not know, and I'm just going to tell you my experience because that's all I do know. I can't speak for everybody, and I don't know exactly how it works now, but there were 8 or 9 pre-service centers when I started this. BYU was one of them, and obviously it's one of the biggest. And I went into the first class, which anybody can go into. It's a religion class that basically tells you about seminary teaching.
And actually, there's kind of been a push to get as many youth in that class as possible, right? Isn't that the one?
I recall some over time trying to, pamphlets that were printed, how do you become a seminary teacher? And I saw some of those.
I thought fairly recently, though, kind of the CES call has been,
Yeah.
let's get as
Yes,
many kids
I
as
remember
possible
that.
into that class.
Even at EFY,
Yeah.
session director training, that
We're
has
supposed
been
to kind of
discussed.
promote that class.
Yeah. So there were, at the time, as I counted them, 14 different screenings that you went through. Everything from as simple as taking a class to a specific religion course, like Doctrines of the Gospel was required to take when I was at BYU, to after you go into that class, from that point on, it's a process of elimination. And so there may be hundreds that start this class, but there's only, when I was hired in 1998, if I remember correctly, only 45 people in all of the United States and Canada were hired. So, and
Out of how many do you think tried?
hundreds.
They kind of told us, yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds, because at BYU alone, there were a
There's
couple
probably-
hundred, maybe more, because there were multiple classes.
Classes,
and
yeah.
10 to 15, and I could be wrong on this, but 10 to 15 were hired out of BYU. The others came from University of Utah, Weber, there's some in Idaho, I think there's pre-service in Arizona. The screenings include things like teaching, for me, that it was teaching a 5-minute lesson. Mm-hmm. And now Brooke was here in on this because we were married in May of 1996. Did I get that right? And so her involvement initially was to see her husband incredibly stressed over trying to make the right kinds of impressions, because I knew how hard it was. I remember one thing that was said, and I can't remember if it was a teacher or just a peer, said, statistically it's harder to get in to be a seminary teacher than to get into med school. In that, somebody had done the math, or that was their opinion or something. And we were repeatedly told, don't put all your eggs in one basket. In fact, at the time, there was no such thing as a religion degree. We were specifically told to have a field of study that was outside of religion, so that if it didn't work out, you had something to do.
But the process took you right up to graduation.
It did. It's a 2-year program.
For those, and so I think even though we were told to have our eggs in one basket, a lot of us were waiting
Yeah.
to see if that was going to work out.
Well, I can speak for myself. I put all my eggs in that basket. I don't do things
You did.
any other way. And so even though they were saying have some backup, in my mind, this is what I thought using that analogy. I thought, my eggs are in this basket. This is what I want more than anything. This is my dream job. And if it doesn't work out, I will be devastated, but I will carefully move my eggs into another basket. But I'm going to go out this 100%. And
as
it was
the
a great amount of
process,
stress.
it was kind of like classes at first, but then just like a student teaching job, as it kind of becomes more involved, you were teaching at a seminary outside of class time. And then we also started having monthly couple meetings.
Monthly couple meetings, yeah. And that's where I remember, and you can share your feelings about this, but those meetings were tough because it was like looking around at the competition.
Yeah.
And then we would go home, and I'd be literally terrified about, this is never going to happen. I'm first of all, I maybe I just have lacked confidence, but I just didn't think, I am not as good as all these other men. It really was mostly men. I only remember maybe one or two women
but almost
that were
all of them
trying
were married,
to become.
and then there were a couple of women.
And the pressure to be married was very, they never, I don't recall overtly saying, if you are not married, we will not hire you. But they did all but say that. It was very clear that the married folks, the one I remember one day drawing up on the board was, if we have teacher A, and he does this, this, and this, and this, and we have teacher B who also does this, 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 and this, and this certain level of quality of teaching, and teacher A is married and teacher B is not married, who do you think we're going to hire?
Yeah, in fact, you and I had this conversation before.
Yeah.
We have a mutual friend, Mark McConkey, who's a grandson of Bruce R. McConkey,
Yes.
who went through the Seminary Institute program with you, and he didn't get hired.
He didn't.
And he wasn't married. And being a McConkey, you got to think that maybe the marriage thing was the thing that kept him out, because he's a delightful.
He is
wonderful. He's a delightful individual.
And I can tell you, he's a great teacher.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he didn't get hired, and I can't say for sure that that's it, but I personally believe that was part of it.
So what are the most rigorous parts of the screening?
I felt, the 5-day classroom experience when we had to go and teach in a classroom, and then we were going to be observed.
The observations were always stressful for you.
How much time of observation was
it varied.
Was it weeks? Was it minutes? Was it hours?
Well, I should say that when I say I've been with CES for 14 years, I include 1 year of where I was an opt teacher. And I was told that stood for Outstanding Part-Time Teacher, but maybe the acronym means something different.
Official part-time.
But I was at Lehigh Junior Seminary from 1997 to 1998, where some observations were known and scheduled, and we were told in advance, but we were also told we could come at any time. Just so you know, we could pop in.
And those were stressful, but those were fun years because we had good friends, and I remember we would spend late nights at the seminary building decorating the room, and I mean, it was a fun job.
Brooke, did you look at this as your calling too?
Oh my gosh, yes. Like I would shop for just the right ribbon for the borders, have you seen your image in your countenance? Remember that when we put that up?
She is awesome. She is super creative and helped me to have, I think, a very well decorated.
Yeah, we would do everything together. And all of your visual aids, we would work on those together.
Countless hours.
Yeah, we used the little dot matrix
during that
printer.
year when I was at Lehigh. First of all, I was still in college, so I'm trying to keep my grades up, and I'm getting paid, but it's not a lot. It's just part-time wages. But it was not uncommon to stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning perfecting a lesson outline, just in case they were going to come. And I remember one occasion where I had done that, and I had stayed up literally until like 2:30 in the morning getting my lesson so good. Like I'm looking at the notes from class and what they're looking for and what is the best way to teach and doctrines, principles, events, and the way they wanted the outline done. And I print it out, and it's beautiful. And the next day, they made one of those appearances, and I was sure that was the Lord blessing me. And here's what happened. It was so interesting. He walked in and said, "Hey, is it okay if I observe you?" And actually, I saw him coming, knew that he was coming in the building, already had an extra copy of the outline. And when he walked in, I said, before he
had it
could
all
say,
ready for
is
him.
it okay if I
remember
visit?
that.
I said, it's so good to have you here. Here's a copy of my outline. And he looked at it and he went, wow, I don't think I need to be here today. And he just left. And I was like, yes, and because I felt so relieved, one, that he wasn't going to be in there. And
Two, to be
so at
prepared.
the end of that year, what happens when I was being hired is, and Brother Dan Bell at the time worked for CES and was part of this hiring process. He had a significant part. In fact, I think his mother used to jokingly say he was kind of like the destroying angel. And there was like, you could, maybe that's harsh to say, but I remember he
people
referred
would
to
say that.
himself in that way. He really had a lot of ability because he was to make or break you as a CES teacher, because he was the last voice before saying, you're going to get an interview with the general authority, or thank you so much for 2 years of your life, but those baskets we were talking about, you're going to want to start going in another direction. So people would start to panic if in February and then March came and Brother Bell had not come, because that was a bad sign. There were so many teachers, more than he could visit. And I remember when I found out that he was going to come observe me. I was teaching Alma chapter 26, and I thought, score, love this chapter. This is killer. And but I was still so nervous. I can honestly say that, well, I really, really wanted this, and I think I think deep down I sensed that I was good at it. But anyway, my wife had written me a note that day. I probably have this somewhere, and it was on my desk. And
I don't even remember this.
It just said that she said something like, I know that you're going to do great. It was very positive, and that you're going to give a great lesson. And apparently one of the pre-service directors who came with Brother Bell that day saw that note on my desk, and so he came in, he observed, I taught my lesson, and then as they were leaving, and I have to tell you, one of the environment was that they were pretty close. They were very kind and very, these are just good people, good men, but they would not give you clues as to how you did. Mm-hmm. And the reason they explained is they'd been burned in the past, where people had thought, but you said my lesson was so good, and why didn't you hire me? And so they would be very close. And so as they were leaving, and this teacher said to me, you can tell your wife that her prayers were answered.
Oh.
And so I remember thinking, this is validation and maybe I'll back up a few months before. I'm watering the lawn of the home that we were living at in a basement apartment in Provo, Utah, just stressed about, am I going to get hired? Am I good enough? Are they going to like me? Am I going to be able to do this thing that I want more than anything in the world? And I just remember having this feeling that I was going to be hired as I was watering the lawn. That was, at that time, a spiritual confirmation. And I denied it multiple times since after that, especially we'd go to those meetings before getting hired.
Right.
So you wouldn't
Yeah,
be
then he'd come home from the meetings and be like, it's never going to happen.
Right.
I felt, and I really had great respect
Right.
for the people I was surrounded with.
Sure.
They were tremendous individuals, and I felt like they were such good teachers. But we did our best to put it in the Lord's hands.
Yeah.
So it was meetings with couples. It was people.
Oh, we didn't tell about the psychologist.
Just list them.
Oh, yes. Well,
So
and
meeting-
I do just want to tell one quick story about one of the couple meetings, because I feel like, I feel like there was one of the seminary advisors' wives. I remember sitting in a meeting and they were talking about how good the benefits were when you work for the church. And so I'm pregnant with our first baby, and I am just wide-eyed romantic, and this is all going to be wonderful. And I remember going up with a friend to this wife, and the friend said to the wife, how does it work with the income and the finances and the budget? And the wife said, I'm not going to lie, it's really hard. And I remember thinking, shame on her for not being more positive. So I said to her, yeah, but it all works out, right? The Lord takes care of you, right? And she goes, it's really hard. And I think now, where was I? Sweet woman. I mean, I really.
She was being honest.
Yeah, she was trying to just really be honest about the situation, because I think that you get a lot of this. It's so great. There's so many blessings, and here's this one woman in her 3 minutes of actually getting to speak to people who's like, I'm really trying to give it to you straight. So
Wow.
it's not like I mean, I think that there were a lot of different perspectives, but I look back on her very fondly.
Yeah.
Even though at the time I was a little bit off-put by her, I really appreciate her willingness to be truthful. So yeah.
So just to summarize, let's list off all the different requirements.
Classes.
How many?
I recall 3.
3 classes.
But some of them were doctrinally based, classes that BYU offered to anybody, but 2 specific to seminary teachers. And then observations along the way of your teaching.
Of a year's worth of observations?
If you made it that far, there was a year's worth of sporadic observations, but these were like a 5-minute lesson to your peers being observed through glass, like people watching you, filming it and watching you.
Got it.
And then a 5-day experience where you taught in a classroom locally in Utah Valley.
Did you have to be invited to that?
You did. Everything from the time you go to the first class, everything after is invitational. So they start to weed out, and the class weeds. People come in and they go, they learn about the salary, or they ask hard questions like, can you honestly envision yourself working with teenagers for the next 30 years of your life? And some people weed themselves out. Approval from a bishop, approval from your stake president. These are letters that are sent. Those are part of the steps as well that we did mention, and that continue throughout your career in CES. Every year you are annually, your worthiness is certified.
Yep.
And so after you make it to that 1 year and you're observed, Brother Bell comes, and if he says, yeah, this guy or this woman, which is more rare, we're going to have him do an interview in Salt Lake. And so then you go to Salt Lake and you meet with the general authority. Well, actually, between that interview, there's a phone call that you're waiting for that usually comes from Brother Bell or from somebody else. It came from one of the pre-service directors, and says, "Congratulations, you're moving on." And then that's the one thing that we forgot to mention was what they referred to as the CES home teacher, but it was a man who worked for CES, and I don't recall him being a psychologist per se, but he came in and did a psychological evaluation of us as a couple.
What kind of questions?
It was the color. Do you remember? The color one where you fill it all out beforehand.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't remember this. I mean, I remember him coming, but I don't remember filling anything out.
I remember filling it out and then coming in, and they kind of go over it with you.
So whether you're a red or a blue or a white or yellow?
Yeah. And I remember them saying, well, Brooke scored really high on the creativity.
Oh, I do remember that.
And I remember going, I think I said something to the effect of, I remember thinking in my mind, well, that's good for me, because then we're a couple. Because they said, and I think we should say this, and you already have, John, they hire you as a couple. We were told that repeatedly. Even in the hire interview where we signed our contract, we are hiring the Mclays. We are hiring you as a couple. So it was very important to me to say, hey, if my wife is creative, that's good for us, because her creativity will come into my classroom and in my lessons.
Right.
And I really believe that, because she is very creative, because I don't think I scored as high as her on that.
And then after that, you are invited to the church office building to meet with a 70.
Yeah, it was Elder Dennis B. Neuenschwander for us of the First Quorum of the 70.
So your interview with the general authority, what types of questions did he ask?
Well, first I should say he met with us as a couple.
Okay.
And then and we had Andrew was about a week old.
We just had our baby.
And while we were waiting for that interview, he interviewed us as a couple, and then he said, may I speak to your husband alone, very politely, and Brooke and Andrew left. And then he asked me worthiness questions. He specifically asked me about pornography, asked me about my testimony, had me share my testimony. If the feeling is, if you've made it to this point, you've done something right. It's very rare, from what we were told, to get an interview with the general authority and not be hired. But his job, as it was explained to us and as it came out, was to certify worthiness. And that's what he was doing with me. So he asked questions about my testimony. I seem to recall maybe a couple of the temple recommend questions coming in, that you would hear about your worthiness. And then we were told, head back over to the church. This was in the administration building. Head back over to the church office building on the 9th floor where CES is. And between the time we made that trek, his secretary was going to make a call. That was going to be yay or nay, pretty much. So we walked over, and then we went in and met with Brother Bell, and he said that it was a yay, that they'd like to hire us, and that my first assignment would be in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and that I would be the seminary principal. And I remember being so shocked by that. First of all, I'm thinking, where the
So
heck
exciting.
is Colorado Springs? But I thought, surely he couldn't have said principal. But anyway.
And I was just so glad that it wasn't Utah, because I remember
You
on the
wanted to
way
get out.
up, I was like, anything but Utah, and so
That was
it was
the-
so exciting.
That was the final step, and then afterwards that day though, and you can tell me if you want to address this later, but part of what we signed was explained to us that divorce, bankruptcy, not having a temple recommend were all things that could lead to termination. And so there was an understanding, and I knew I knew that. We agreed, and we fully understood what we were getting into, including the salary. And so, as one of my former colleagues once said, when I signed the bottom line, we feel like we forfeit our right to complain about that. And I don't know how good we were.
I think
over
we
the
agreed
years,
that
but-
though. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
we agreed.
We
It
had
was
no
what we-
problem with those things.
John, it was what we wanted. I had just been told that you now have your dream job. You get to do.
And
what
you felt
I
that
was-
way.
Oh, I was
You've always loved
elated.
that job.
I was elated. Yeah.
Yeah, you loved it.
So it was exciting. But I remember seeing back to the process of being hired, because that's what we're talking about. An advertisement for a car dealership where there was one of their dealers, I guess, under a microscope, a giant microscope. And I would just say it was, and the kind of scrutiny and the way that they look at you and everything. I felt like I had a 2-year-long job interview. That's what it felt like.
Yeah,
it was
it's a long
very
process.
much scrutinizing and looking at, and people are praying over you and asking about your worthiness, and you're trying in every way to prove that you are. And when I say that, I guess you could say to prove that you were a true believing, testimonied, correlated, deeply testimonied member of the church, because that's what they were looking for.
And you were.
He was.
Yes,
And you were.
she was. Yeah, we were.
We were.
All right. So, I guess the next phase I'd like to go into is just a brief. I want to ask you some details about what it's like to be a seminary teacher, and then talk about, or institute teacher, and then talk about the different things that you did, just at a high level, just like some of the types of things you did.
Sure.
And so, what's the salary structure of a seminary institute teacher, of a CES employee?
good
Just give us a
question.
general.
Okay, so it's comparable to a teacher in school teacher in Utah. In fact, I think they usually went to great lengths to make sure that it was not tremendously more, because there's a great concern about image and not appearing to be get more than we need or want. Picture a chart where on one side is your years of teaching, and on the top is your level of education. So if you have a master's degree and you've taught for 12 years, you make this much money. It doesn't matter if you're a principal, an institute teacher, a coordinator, it's pretty much the same. There is a cost of living allowance for some areas, and sometimes when you're a principal or a director, there's a stipend. For me, when I was a seminary principal, it was $600 a year. That came with that extra work that might be associated.
So give us a general idea of what you start out at and what it advances to.
I started out at about $27,000 when I was hired, and then when I left, it was about $69,000.
But talk about, like, okay, after a couple of years, it goes to
Yeah.
here.
Well,
and-
so every year you get a little bit of a percentage of a raise,
Yeah,
and then you
it's not merit based. It is just across the
Right.
board what the church decides they're going to give you.
And they,
So-
like, the church paid for you to get your master's degree, which was, we always looked at that
Yeah.
as such a double blessing, because they paid for the master's degree, plus when the master's degree was gotten, that meant a bit of a raise.
More earning
And so, so there was always a raise every year that we could look forward
Yeah.
to.
a modest raise.
Yeah, it was like, what, 3% or something?
There was something that happened significant about, I don't know that it was that
Oh,
high, but
yeah.
about 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm going to get the dates wrong, when the CES decided that they wanted to, this is the way it was explained to me, the church wanted all their employees to be basically the same. So we used to have this 9-month salary, and then during the summer we had an option. It was SEO, the summer employment option, where we could work for up to 8 weeks and make some extra money. I remember my father would build fences, he would do whatever during the summer to try to help make ends meet. Several years ago, the church said, we're going to have our seminary CES guys be year-round as well. So they restructured the salary at that time. I remember there was this little bit of an increase, which was nice. But there was also a sense of loss because for some of us that go into teaching, the holidays are the best part. You know, more time off in the summer,
like the
2
whole
weeks
summer.
or something during Christmas, and now it was
Okay.
leave days and much more of a traditional structure.
Okay, so it was in the high 20s to start with.
Yep.
Within 5 years, you were where?
Well,
Probably in the
within 5 years, I got my
35s.
master's, and so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it was
true.
still fairly low, maybe high 30s.
So high 30s
Yeah.
within 5
Low
years.
40s.
You know, I don't remember exactly like I just know that there was always a little bit of a raise that ended up being maybe like $100 a paycheck, and so of course
and I
we were
wanna say,
glad. But
I think it's important to say I feel funny talking about it because it's kind of guarded.
Yeah, like you're not
You're
really-
not supposed to, and then that's okay. I mean, I have no problem sharing this with you, but in CES, there's a culture of we don't really openly talk about what we make.
right.
And so, and again, it's all relative because I happen to know that there are people who make far less than that and that are really struggling. And
Although I
but it
will
was-
say, as a mother, the pay was always, you know, I mean, we were always so grateful for the job, and of course
Yeah.
we were doing it not for the money, but when my kids started going into school, every year I would be like $1,000 below poverty, like just below reaching the poverty level. So my kids, so I always felt like we were always scrimping pennies.
You
We
were always
all-
at the poverty level.
just always above it.
Right above the poverty level.
Just eking
Right above
above. Yeah, and of course, if it was just the two of us, we wouldn't have been. But because we were multiplying and replenishing,
Right.
we were doing a really good job of that. And so the size of family that we had always
Okay.
kept us just
So
to that.
to start with in the high 20s, within 5 years, low 40s. Within 10 years, you were in the 50s.
in the 50s.
And then by
maybe pushing 60, and then these last few years, and like I said, it was in the high 60s.
okay. And Brooke, you always felt like you were scrimping
Yes,
financially.
always.
Okay.
Well,
And maybe
we
that's
took-
just because we're not good with our money, but I think we try to be good.
I want to own that to a degree because everybody makes choices, and I don't want to
Yeah.
pretend like poor decisions that we make are somebody else's fault. But we have never had cable television our entire married life because, one, it's evil, right? And so, but it was financial, and we don't
Yeah.
buy jet skis and have things like that, and we try
And we
to
have some
live within our means.
Friends that are in CES, that have been in CES as long as we have, that have found remarkable ways to travel. In my experience, though, most women have to work.
So list off quickly some of the things you went without, or some of the ways that you had to be
Oh.
creative to scrimp and save.
Oh my goodness.
How about years of one car?
This is embarrassing because we've done so many things
we
that I would
have.
never admit to.
How about
Years of one car. That's good. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
How about
We
baby shower gifts?
sold John's wedding ring, sold back every
Don't
book that
tell
we
him
could.
That one.
We sold back every book that we
What about
owned that
when we
I
got the
used for
formula
certain-
at the baby shower, and then we would go to Safeway and see if we
And
could
take it
return
back.
to get
Yeah.
money to buy food. And
That
yeah,
happened. That happened a lot though. Like we
It
would
did.
take back gifts all the time because we were like, we need money to
So you get
eat.
gifts, and instead of take them, you would refund them to get
Yeah.
the money. Okay, what else?
Yeah, but thanks for the gifts, guys.
well, and I don't want to be in the least bit facetious in saying people were so generous.
Oh, without
And there was
question.
not an occasion that I can remember, a Christmas or a holiday, especially around the holidays, where people would not, from the earliest time in our marriage, and this is, kind of tender to me because people in the church are really nice. I don't have to tell you this, they're good people. From Christmas trees that were, left on the porch to, even my hearing aids that I have now are a gift from a member. I think I'm a little emotional, a little sad about it because I fear that some of that is lost in the decisions that we've made. That my job, it was weird because it was a paradox. It was like they don't pay us enough to be able to really feel like we can just do this ourselves, but because we are who we are in this position, people looked out for us.
They did.
People sacrificed for the
remarkable.
Mclays, and I fully acknowledge that. And my deepest gratitude is extended to those people. Yeah. But I don't want to pretend like...
tell some of the more ways that people would help you out.
Oh, well, every Christmas,
monetary gifts,
when we would go into tithing supplement, every Christmas the bishop would say,
maybe $100.
Someone left us
somebody gave you
this envelope.
Yeah.
Or there would be a knock at the door, and it was, what was that
the
year?
Money tree?
The money tree. Yeah, there was this tree
probably
with all of this money.
$200+ on there or
Yeah.
something, which to us is like,
we wept like
groceries
babies.
for a month.
Yeah, we had a Christmas tree dropped off actually twice, I believe.
I had basketball shoes. I love to play basketball, and I remember
that
a student
was a sweet one.
gave me basketball shoes. It's just
that was a
great
really
young man.
incredible. That was a sweet student, because this student just entirely on his own said, you know, Brother Mclays needs basketball shoes, and they showed up, and he did not want him to know, but the receipt was left, and it had his name in it.
Had the family name on, because they got, you know, anyway.
And
I brought that up at his graduation. I was able to weave that into a talk, but I'm trying to think of what else people did for us.
Oh, I know. We once we had purchased something on eBay for, it was for a project
Software,
I was doing. And it was like a big purchase, like
$400.
I was going to say thousands, because it felt like so much money.
It did feel like more.
And it ended up being a fraudulent purchase. And so another man found out about this through the seminary students. I mean, those students were listening and always looking out, you know, for opportunity. They're just good kids. And so one of their fathers called and offered me the software that I had purchased plus enough of a job to pay back the money that we had lost. It was incredible.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Good people.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I was thinking about my hearing aids, and these are very expensive hearing aids. And when I bought them, I don't know that they made any more expensive. And this friend of mine, this good man, when he felt inspired to do that. It came from a conversation in a parking lot at a church building in Colorado Springs, and you know, he said, "I'm only asking one thing of you in return, you know, one favor." And I said, "Yeah, anything." And he said, "Just don't tell anybody that it was me." You know, and I thought, and I remember, and I still feel this way. That's the kind of person I want to be. That the help that people offered us, the support, and not just in monetary ways, but the feeling that we are behind the Mclays, that was very real, and for the most part, that was substantive, and that kind of helps you through, you know, doing what you do. So
beautiful. That was a great segment. Let's talk about. Let's list off all the different things that you were responsible for, or positions, or things that you did.
Okay. My first, and I spent 12 years in seminary, and so when Brother Bell said you were going to Colorado Springs, he was serious about me being the principal. So I was the seminary principal, the seminary teacher, the seminary council advisor.
No, I didn't think we had CES.
Seminary.
Yeah, release time in other states outside of Utah.
We do. We have a handful, and in fact,
in Oregon, there used to be one in California, but maybe it's not there.
It never has been. California won't allow it, but 7 states, I think. So Utah, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, and I don't know if that's all of them, but
no.
Is it because there's lots of Mormons in Colorado Springs?
Well,
and
there's
because
4
they can
states,
secure the space for it,
and because of some, I think, some hardworking and aggressive, connected priesthood leaders from back in the 80s who said, we can make this happen, and they did. And but there was, I remember it used to be in Littleton, in Arapahoe, in Cherry Creek. They still have some programs, but Colorado Springs, there's not a release time seminary building east of Colorado Springs in the United States.
Oh. So
it is a unique, and it was a unique assignment. It was kind of a one-man assignment, which is rare when you're first hired to be sent out to do all these things. But the institute director was right there in the building and had an office in there. So he had a lot of experience in seminary himself and in institute. And so I had a colleague. He wasn't there all the time. So I was the principal, the teacher, a seminary council advisor, the building agent, the budget manager, and a coordinator. They made me an early morning coordinator for a stake. And so I kind of worked with this other CES man to train and appoint seminary teachers, which was interesting, being 24 years old and interviewing people in their 60s. And I remember the first time a man came in and he looked right past me and he said, "I'm here for the interview. Who am I supposed to speak with?" And I said, that'd be me. And so I was pretty young to be doing this. And I basically did 5 classes a day, every day, 5 seminary classes. So that was the main thing, is that I was teaching those 5 classes. On top of that, I was teaching Institute part-time, usually 1 night a week. And so the coordinating position came and went. I did that for a little time, and then it went, and then it came back. And same with Institute. There were times when I was so stressed getting my master's degree. In fact, when I was working on my master's degree, I was teaching those 5 classes a day as a seminary principal with my seminary assignment. I had been called to serve on the High Council, and Brooke was pregnant with twins. So at one point, I'm serving on the High Council, teaching seminary full-time, working on a master's degree, and my wife, and we have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and 2 babies.
Wow.
And
Wow.
And I
exciting.
I remember going to the stake president and saying, because we were required to sit on the stand as High Council members anytime we visited a ward, including our own, which I was assigned to at the time. But I had to ask for special permission to sit with my family to help with the twins when they were newborn.
Nice.
And I got 2 or 3 weeks where I was able to sit with
Yeah,
Brooke.
you had a lot of help.
Okay, so was there non-Colorado related things that you were involved in?
Beginning in the year 2000, I was called and asked to be part of EFY. And the name of the person that called me was Vince Stroud, and I don't know who recommended me, because I didn't
called, you don't
want
mean
to-
calling, you mean phone call.
Phone call.
Okay.
It wasn't calling and thank you for in the church, but they said, "We've heard about you, and we want you to." And I kind of said, "Let me give it some thought." I had some mixed feelings about EFY, because we'll probably get into this, but I kind of felt like it was like spiritual Twinkies, and that my job as a CES man was to be doctrinally pure and sound and very correlated. And so I had some hesitation, but I had a conversation that led me to accepting that responsibility, which led me to teaching for 2 years, just teaching. And then after 2 years, they asked me to be a session director. And so I have been all over the United States and to Canada more than once teaching and representing.
And did you talk about your duties as an institute director? Because you also worked with the Aspire program at the Air Force Academy.
I haven't yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So in
jumping ahead.
2000 and
Okay, wait, so with EFY, you would travel around,
yeah.
you would just present to youth at EFY conferences?
Initially.
Couple different things. So it might be like if it's EFY, the mainstream one, Connecticut, Texas, take your pick, where it's the week long, and Brooke and I would go together if I was directing, and we would be kind of in charge. Not in charge, because there's a whole hierarchy and structure, but
You lead you're like the
teaching.
father and the mother of the session,
Right.
kind of.
These are groups from anywhere from 150 to the BYU groups 1,500 we would have for a week. And yes.
Did you guys do the BYU EFY?
Oh yeah.
Oh, we did.
Multiple times.
Yeah, several.
Where are your
Loved
kids
it.
during this time?
We
That's a
hired
headache.
babysitters, or else.
Did they pay you extra for that?
No, they used to. Right before we came into EFY, they would allow families to come, and so we have
Yeah.
a lot of friends who have fond memories of bringing their families. But when we came, there was kind of a rule passed that families should not come, and then so it was like the wife could be
So it could be
flexible,
just-
and so sometimes I would come, sometimes I would get a babysitter and stay the whole week. And then it seems like more recently there was kind of this decision that no families and the wife should be there.
So did they ever pay you to go? You never got paid?
No.
But you were expected to go?
Yeah,
In the
they
latter
did give
years,
me,
they
I got the
really
food and I got to
expected
stay
it.
with John, but I was
So
not
you
paid
didn't
a
get
salary.
you didn't get paid for the babysitters, and you didn't get paid for your participation.
Right,
And
no.
and I got paid to go,
Right.
but not a lot. No, I wanted to do it, and I think that's been made clear. This is something that
Sure.
I wanted to do, but it was $750 to be there from Saturday morning until Saturday morning, and to speak and teach, 12 or 13 times, from a 5-minute presentation in a meeting to an hour-long presentation to the entire session. And so again,
And then we just it usually was a wash, I think, because by the time we would pay a babysitter and make arrangements for the kids, we felt like it
They
was
would
just a
reimburse
gift for us.
Financially, it was a wash.
Yeah, we weren't doing it for the money.
we were never doing it for
Okay.
the money. But I do want to say, for EFY and CES, they would pay, if airfare was involved, they would pay it.
Travel
if there were
expenses.
meals, they
Sure.
would pay
For you?
traveling expenses.
They would pay
yes,
my travel
for her
Okay,
as
for
well.
Brooke. Okay. Okay, so you did EFY.
Yeah,
Did you ever do Education Week?
I did 2
Fun.
years, 2009 and 2010. And
You were invited this year.
I was going to do it this year. I had talks that I'd submitted and approved, and I kept, as we were going through this journey, I kept everything in case, because I was pretty sure I was going to find out the church was still true. I was pretty sure that would be the result of my really, soul searching. So we were at EFY session director training this year in April. We were there because my assignment was to go to Florida, and I politely declined.
Oh,
And
wow.
So this is all still very fresh, and maybe we'll talk about some of those if it comes up.
We will, for sure.
Some of those things. But Best of EFY, which is kind of like a mini EFY, where they will take teachers out. I did Long Beach, California, Seattle. I've been to youth conferences because stakes can call EFY office and say, hey, we want some of your teachers to come out. So I remember I did one with Curtis Jacobs in Minnesota. That was great. Stake Center right by the temple. And the Education Week, and I think that about covers it.
Okay, so you've done EFY, Education Week.
But countless firesides for stake
firesides.
standard nights, ward firesides, my own ward, other wards in the stake.
Okay.
More than I can count. And Brooke sometimes was invited to speak at those often because she's an excellent speaker.
I bet.
I mean, she'd be a better session director than I would. And,
Stop.
even when I got to tell you this, when we first started in CES, we were kind of told, your wife shouldn't teach.
Not CES, EFY.
EFY, my bad. I need to be clear about my acronyms. But EFY, it was, your wife shouldn't, and I really struggled with that. In fact, I struggled with it to the point where I kind of ignored it because I thought my wife is very capable, deeply
Well, I think that you
testimony.
ignored it at my prompting because I'd be like, I have a lot of really nice things to say.
But it's funny because in
we
retrospect,
kind of
it would be
pushed
like,
that.
I would have an hour and I would say, sweetie, how about I give you 10 minutes?
You did that. You
And
really
so,
did that.
but that, I will say that's kind of changed. And now in EFY, sisters that desire to speak,
There's space for that.
there's space for that.
Yeah.
That's
And
nice.
they're
That is
very
It'd be even nicer if they
capable.
paid them for it.
It would be
It would
so
be nicer.
fun.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you were going to just really quickly, some other institute stuff you did.
Oh yeah. I was the institute director that in
That
Colorado
was
Springs.
a year and a half ago. He moved from seminary to institute. And that job is kind of a unique job because there's not a institute building. So it included.
I was. I taught at the United States Air Force Academy, which my understanding is the only Monday night class in the church that's authorized, and then UCCS, and I was the institute director for all of Colorado Springs. So anybody that was 18 to 30 years old and matriculating in any kind of school, that was our focus. And
Got it.
I was over the other institute teachers. I appointed teachers. I did in-services, but I was the go-to institute guy for 1 year.
Okay. So there's a lot we could go into about how much you loved teaching seminary and institute and doing all these things.
Yeah.
We're not going to go into that a lot.
That's okay. I think we've established that.
But let's establish it now.
Okay.
Talk for just a minute on how you enjoyed teaching seminary, how you enjoyed teaching institute, how much you enjoyed, if you did or didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
What was it like for you? Just interacting with the students, the whole deal.
Yeah. There were pros and cons to every job, but and so there were stressful days, and there were days when I thought, I don't know if I can go in and deliver one more time and one more lesson. But generally, what it was like for me was awesome. Generally, what it was like for me was I really felt like I connected with these young people, like I was making a difference in their lives. And I think that's a good question because it helps to why this is so hard for me now. I had purpose, and I recognized that I was not perfect, and I constantly strive to improve my teaching and to learn from other people. But I had incredible relationships with my colleagues. Some of them I still consider my closest friends, like brothers to me or like fathers to me. So I used to say to Brooke and to others who would ask me that question, there's hardly a thing about my job I don't like. It's not just what I do, it's who I do it with and why I do it. Everything about it to me was like, it was my dream job. And so yes, there were stresses and some directors and bosses, if you will, that I got along with better than others. But for the most part, all of my reviews across the board made me feel good about myself, made me feel good about what I was doing. And so I was able to say, this is not about the money. And so I go out, I remember going, I mentioned Long Beach, and I gave a talk that I had developed for really 10 years, you know, and adding current quotes and perfecting it in my PowerPoint presentation. And I got paid $150 for that, plus expenses to go out there. And I remember thinking, I know the people in the world that do what I do to an audience of probably about 1,000 people at that particular one. They might get paid more, but I get paid in different ways. You know, I get to know that I am making a difference in the kingdom of God. And those types of feelings were the foundation that what I do not only matters to me and my family right now in that I'm making a living, but that I am truly building the kingdom of God on earth and helping young people and helping the church to grow stronger. So mostly positive feelings throughout my career with CES.
Beautiful. Brooke, what was it like for you to be the wife of?
You know,
What did you love
We loved
about
it.
Yeah.
We loved all of it. We loved the youth, and to this day, we have nothing but nice memories. I mean, those kids at that seminary building in Colorado Springs are some of the most remarkable kids. They come from loving homes, they have purpose, they have light, and you know, there are a few that are crazy or we worry about them, but that was all part of the whole story. Was, you know, there was just so much personality to that lifestyle. And we would have kids stop by crying, or they would come by before their prom dates. I mean, I felt like I belonged to a really incredible
Or they had prom in our house
stage
times.
of their life. Yeah, we even hosted one of their proms. I mean, I felt like I belonged.
So they would.
Yeah, there was a belonging to this very special part of these kids' lives, this very formative part. And to be part of that is remarkable and beautiful. We loved it.
What did the spirit of being engaged in this work bring to your home, to your children, to your relationship? How did it feel?
That's a good question. Well, if you're asking me, it was often, that's a good question. For me, I've always been a little bit conflicted because I love a lot of the gospel, but I don't like feeling like I'm cramming it down anyone's throats, especially my children. And so often, you know, I mean, our kids, the church was just our second home. We were there for basketball games and for seminary things. And so I think for them growing up, that was always a very happy thing. But at the same time, like if I would notice a struggle in one of our boys, I remember saying to John, if he does not want to go on a mission, I don't want that to be an issue. And so I was always very careful about making sure that our children knew that this was the life that we had chosen for us, but to also allow space for their own personal growth. So.
But I imagine the spiritual high, where you're just always together, united with a cause, serving the Lord, teaching, modeling.
We were often modeling, but I think that because we held ourselves at a standard, there was also a lot of low times where, like, if we would fight or if we would be upset,
or if we missed scripture study. I think there was an added measure of guilt because we are supposed to be the people who lead by example.
Yeah.
You know,
actually, behind the scenes, I would say was not always model, and we tried to be honest about that with the youth that we taught. You know, we would say we fight all the time. We need you to know that.
So what are all the things you did do? What are all the things you did do or tried to do?
We would try to do everything exactly like it was supposed to be. Family home evening,
family home evening,
morning scripture study. Although the number of fights that we have had over morning scripture study, because John knew exactly what it should look like and that he should lead out. And if he didn't wake up right before breakfast and lead it out and I let it out, then some sort of a sin was committed. I mean, so there was angst when things weren't carried out exactly the way that it should.
Activities.
Let's keep
meetings,
listing the
Family
things.
activities.
We tried
Evening
to pray in the evening.
prayers.
So we tried to pray in the morning and in the evening as a family, meals together.
Like going to service projects to help the youth, like Eagle Scout projects.
The other burden, especially early on, was I tried to attend as many of my student activities as I possibly could. So I was paying, as a young seminary teacher, to go to plays and basketball games, and that
Which
for me,
was
that
fun.
was worth
We would
it.
take the kids along to that.
Because I love sports and I love my students, and it was our life.
Yeah.
The church was our life.
Couple prayer and couple scripture study. We would always try to do that, but I'm
Yeah.
afraid we weren't very good because often we were
Could've
very
done
tired.
Better.
We just wanted to watch a movie. But yeah, and so like
PG
I think that we
13
were
only.
both keenly aware of what we should always be doing. And so even in situations where like we might have a few minutes of downtime, I would feel like, why don't we get the kids together and read a friend story? Why don't we get the kids together and, it was always this anxiously engaged.
Yeah.
Okay. And how was your relationship?
Normal, good
Yeah.
and bad and horrible and sometimes
I think it was
not.
mostly good. And maybe I'll bring up something my father said because it could be a segue and we might come back to this. But when I was explaining to my dad that in June that I think I'm probably going to leave the church and I'm definitely going to leave CES, he said, I was talking about some of the issues that we're going to discuss later in this podcast, but he said, son, when you go to EFY and you talk about your marriage, don't you put your best foot forward. You don't stand up and tell the kids the bad things or the ugly things. You try to present yourself in the best way possible. And I think he was trying to make, and it was a good point, that why would the church be any different, right? Now, we can talk about those differences later, because I think there is a big difference. But what I'm trying to say is Brooke and I never put ourselves out there as the couple to be, as the only
No.
true and living couple.
We would try to be honest.
We had our ups and our downs, but we were happy. And one thing I can tell you consistently throughout our relationship and from these young people that we were teaching, I was going through these letters the other day, but is email or letter or comment after comment of, we hope we have a relationship like you. The way we were viewed is very significant because the people viewed us as this ideal couple, an ideal family. And I remember people saying, I want to have the exact same number of kids as you, that goes boy, girl, and then boy, girl twins. That's, people repeatedly, and I hope my husband's like you, Brother Mclay. I hope I can find a wife like Sister Mclay. And that's very flattering and that feels good.
I think also, if I'm being really honest about, if you're asking about how our relationship was, I think that I have always believed, even from the minute that we were married, that we were kind of chosen, that there was this something special about John and Brooke, that God brought us together to do good, that together we would, and so even when we would fight or argue, there was always this knowledge that we were going to not just work it out, but we were going to be the celestial, glorified family, and that was what we were made for. And so I think that was kind of the underwriting feeling behind a lot of the things that pulled us out, but also that gave us hope and purpose, but also that created angst because there was such a standard that we would hold ourselves to. For instance, and I think that I've always been kind of more of the romantic, and he's always been a little more by the book. And so like once after a fight, I remember saying years ago, John, I think that we should, maybe we should look into marriage counseling. And John said, oh, we have the scriptures. All that we need to know is within the scriptures. And so that was very much.
I said it very gently and lovingly, didn't
He did with a little pat.
But that's true. I really believe.
Yeah, and so that was very much
nothing we couldn't figure out.
Yeah,
with
it was
the scriptures
very
and
by
words
the
of
book.
prophets.
And like early on, even within our sex life, it was very much by the book. I knew what positions were allowed and what was not allowed and what we should say and shouldn't say. And so we held rigidly to those we were both very obedient. So we held rigidly to those standards, knowing that they would bring us happiness and that we were the chosen ones.
Still, acknowledging that we're sinners throughout this process,
Right.
and repenting and
fighting.
as needed.
And kissing.
We never looked at ourselves as superhuman or somehow special, but I assure you that other people looked at us in that way because we were in CES, because of the positions of leadership that we had. It was very much a constant in our lives that you're being watched, and sometimes that was very pleasurable, and other times it wasn't.
Overall, was there something beautiful about it?
About our marriage?
About the
Just
whole
that
experience.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Talk about it. Just let's end with that. Let's end this segment with that.
Okay. I just think that there is something about belonging and feeling so at home with your people, and they open their arms wide open to you, and you give everything to them, and that was our life. It was absolute sacrifice, and it was beautiful. I never, even in the moments where I think I don't want to go to this meeting, I knew that if I went to the meeting that, I would be succored by the people. And I think that from the very beginning of this faith crisis, we've never had a problem with leaving the church. It's always been losing those people. We love them.
And John, thank you, Brooke. And John, for you, beautiful?
Yeah. And again, particularly the love that I felt in my heart for these young people. I particularly EFY. I love teaching in the classroom, but there's something about that experience that was so powerful to me of connecting with these young people, and I hold them in the highest regard, and I have such fond memories of these people, and not just the youth, but the people I worked with are good men and good women, and I believe that they love the Lord, and so letting go of that, it was so beautiful, and it was so fulfilling in so many ways that it's been, I think we'll probably talk about that, but it's been brutal. Because I genuinely feel that I was making a difference in that, and that I was connected to something good, and I loved my life in CES. I loved these young people and my association with them. I couldn't get enough of it. I told Brooke a couple of years ago, if I could travel and speak, like do this EFY kind of a thing for a living, that's all I would do. I would be fulfilled. Just if I could make a living traveling and speaking and teaching the gospel and connecting with these people and helping them feel of worth and to recognize the promise within them. And so very positive experiences.
Come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far for us to strive our useless cares from us to drive to the sand joy. Your hearts will swell